All right, let's officially get the show started. This is going to be a fun one. I love when we have guests from the outside that don't typically come on the show. This is going to be his first time on, and he's a specialist in bail reform. This gentleman, he's an attorney. I graduated a long time ago, yet I was surprised. He looks like a spring chicken when we got to meet backstage. He's also got a master's degree in education from Tarleton State, as well as getting his law degree from Texas Tech School of Law. Very intelligent guy, very knowledgeable on bail reform, and we've got some great conversations we're going to bring up. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're at home right now, and if you're on the screen right now, give a little thumb snap, a little high five, a little claps to each other. Ken W. Good. What's going on, brother?
Hey, thanks for having me. Y'all are a lively group.
Yeah, you saw us when we were just chilling beforehand, but once the lights go on, it's game time. You know what I mean?
Yes, very much so.
Ken, I introduced you a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you're involved in bail reform, how you got involved in bail reform?
Yes, I'm an attorney in Texas. I've been an attorney for 30 years. I've started out practicing law, representing doctors and hospitals when they get sued. I started doing a lot of appellate work, so I've argued in a lot of the appellate courts across Texas. Bondsman had some default judgments, and so someone asked, who do you hire? And they said, we need an appellate attorney. And so I fixed that situation for the bondsman. I guess word spread, and my practice grew. I represent several insurance companies as their Texas counsel. I'm on the board of directors for the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I've argued the two most important cases involving bail law in Texas before the Court of Criminal Appeals and won them both, and appear before the legislature on bail matters, proposed legislation, and am working on these alleged what we call bail reform to improve the criminal justice system, not to tear it down.
Excellent. And Ken, as some people don't know in the audience, everybody right now in the United States of America knows what the Texas Democrats did by leaving the state during, legislature and how big of a deal that was. What people everybody thinks this is just about voting laws, but in fact, it sounds like there is something going on in the state. And honestly, I didn't even know, and I usually pay attention to local laws and state laws, that there is a huge bill trying to be passed regarding the actual bail reform system. Is that correct? What exactly is going on in the state of Texas regarding that, and what are you working on, and how are you involved?
Well, this is the third session that we've had bills proposed for bail reform. The last two sessions before that, they've ended in stalemate. This session, we had a bill that passed the Senate with a proposed constitutional amendment to allow more people to be held in jail without bail. And then it was before the House. It was right behind the election integrity bill, and the Democrats delayed it till 11, and the deadline was to vote on the bill by midnight. They couldn't delay it any longer, and so they walked, and depriving the House of a quorum. Once they walked, it also deprived them of a quorum for the next bill, which was our bill. And so we got pushed to the special session along with the election integrity bill. Again, the same thing. They started the same place they ended. We made a few changes to the bill. It's already been voted out of the Senate with the constitutional amendment, which requires a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate. And so we're now just waiting for the House to come back. So once again, the election integrity bill is holding up bail reform. And as Senator Huffman, who's carrying the bail reform bills, did on the floor of the Senate, she read the names of 5 or 6 victims in Houston who she claims died because this bill was not passed during the legislative session. And that if this bill had passed during the legislative session, those people would have been allowed to be held in jail, and their victims would not have been murdered.
Wow. Casey's going to have a question for you in a second. If you guys could do me a favor, we've got a decent amount watching. We're a little over 130. We're starting to hit numbers again, which is good to see with some of you guys sharing the page consistently. But I need you guys to either give me a thumbs up, a heart, or the care symbol if you can. And if you have the resiliency in your gut to share this out there, please share it on the count of 3. 3, 2, I just skipped 2. 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and share this out there. Casey, what's your question for Ken?
Well, first of all, numbers are hard, so I get counting. No, my question for you, Ken, is what will the bail reform bills, what will they accomplish? So are they, with them being so close to being passed, like what is the main goal of these bills that you're talking about?
Well, I think the number one goal that the bills do is requires a magistrate to review a criminal history before setting bail. The bills are named after Damon Allen, who was a trooper who was killed by someone he stopped on a traffic stop. And the reason why he was killed is Mr. Black, that was the name of the driver, had been arrested for assaulting a peace officer in Smith County. He had a significant criminal history, but the magistrate didn't look at his criminal history, so he set a low bond. And then when the criminal history was brought to his attention, he raised the bond, and that's the reason why there was a warrant when he was stopped on the side of the road. And so the major part of the bill, in my opinion, is requiring magistrates to review criminal histories before setting bail. And I think there's other parts to it in training for judges on setting bail. But I think the major change will be reviewing criminal histories as a requirement before setting bail. Current law allows it as is something the court has the discretion to do, but this will require it as a mandatory thing that the judges have to do before setting bail.
Why is there pushback on that? If you don't mind me asking.
That's what I was thinking.
The problem on bail reform is not on those types of issues. The big problem with bail reform is how do you magistrate large groups of people through your county jail in our big urban areas? Because you've got massive numbers of people, and how do you get those people through the jail quickly and efficiently? That's where we have huge fights and disagreements. Historically, Texas has used bail schedules. The federal cases have involved lack of procedures. Then there's misrepresentations about what that has actually done. And so now in Harris County, they're just simply releasing people on a $100 PR bond. You see crime increasing because that was a failure. It was a failure in New York. It was tried when it was tried. And so the real fight on bail reform is how do you handle these large groups of people in our urban areas? And I don't know if our bill actually does a good job on addressing that. Now, what it does is allows a county to use a bail schedule, and it codifies what the federal courts have required if you do that. But I think some of our big counties don't want to do that. They just want to do a simple release, which does not work, has been a failure. And so I think this bill says they can't do that anymore. So they have to choose between a bail schedule or individual magistration, which they can't afford to do. So there's still a fight ahead on what to do when the bill passes.
I think that's absolutely absurd that it's even a question whether or not to look at previous whatever. It's insane. Suni, I believe, do you have a question for Ken? If
I
you can?
do. Since we're talking about not looking into criminal history or patterns, how does this factor in public safety? Like, how does all this figure into that?
That's a really good question. And I think that the way I would address that, I would say, is what are you trying to do on criminal justice reform, bail reform? Are we trying to set up a system that meets the constitutional requirements, like has procedures to protect the poor, or are we looking at a system that's just fair? Where we get into trouble is when we look for fairness. When we talk about public safety, we want to make sure we protect the public. I mean, like in Harris County, when somebody's as long as they're not arrested for certain crimes, they never see a magistrate. They're just released on a $100 bond, no matter how many times they get arrested for that crime. So there's no gatekeeper. Nobody is doing an individual magistration. So when you look at these types of releases, you're looking at public safety, and you want to make sure whatever you set up protects the poor, but you won't want to set up a system that allows career criminals to take advantage of the criminal justice system. I think what we're seeing is we're sacrificing public safety in some of the reforms across the country because we're trying to set up a system that in the end allows career criminals to take advantage of the criminal justice system. I'm not saying that these people don't have good intent, but they're not thinking through the reforms that they're proposing, and the end result is they're allowing the criminals to take advantage of them.
So I'm from California, and in California, what you're seeing, especially when it comes to bail reform, is this notion that because poor people are disproportionately affected by bail levels, the actual fair thing to do, rather than making it so that rich people also are just as likely to end up in jail, is make it so that poor people are less likely to get in jail. So what is it? What is the argument they make as to why this actually makes sense? Because you have places like San Francisco and LA that have basically decriminalized almost any crime under $1,000 in value. And they say it's because, it's this notion that poor people, cash bail screws over poor people. So what do you think of that whole idea and the kind of laws that come about because of it?
Well, we have to start with, let's just ask the question, who's the victim? I mean, we would say, or I would say, that if you rob me, I'm the victim. And that
Be a
the
we.
criminal justice system
Yeah, that's a we.
and,
That's definitely a we.
give the redress to the victim. But like you've got the DA of LA who says that we just have a different view of who the victim is. They believe that the real victim in in the criminal justice system is the defendant. And when you do that, you're like in Harris County, when you decriminalize crime for $1,000, anything under $1,000, you're creating chaos. And like I've said, you're setting up a system that allows criminals to just have run of the chicken coop. If we were in my hometown talking in farm metaphor.
No, that.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, looking at what's become of LA, especially like San Francisco, you're seeing these businesses just have to be closed constantly. I was just home for about 2.5, 3 weeks in early June, and it is just insane how quickly these cities have deteriorated. I remember 10 years ago going to San Francisco, and it was beautiful, and it's almost specifically because of these bail reforms that they're chasing that has allowed for this just there's no consequences anymore. So
I think that's a good point is, are we going to have accountability? And, in our inner cities, I would just highlight, schools have failed, families have failed, drug abuse is just rampant. And then we have no job opportunities in the inner cities. And we have all these protests from the last summer that have destroyed businesses. So they've destroyed the few business opportunities that they had. And those have not, some of them have not come back, a large percentage of them. So we're creating a never-ending cycle in our inner cities, and we're wanting to blame that on a disparity in race, and I think it's a disparity of the inner cities, and that's really we're giving up on accountability. And so, criminal justice system used to be the place that was your last opportunity to become a productive citizen. Now we're giving up on that too, and now we're saying you're the real victim, and really. Maybe it's true. We have victimized you your entire life, so why we should not let the criminal justice system victimize you either? I don't think that's right. We need to be accountable. We need to set a high standard for people. Maybe that comes into consideration on punishment, but it should not be guilt or innocence. I mean, if otherwise we don't have a society.
Yeah.
And I have a different spin on a question here on what your perspective is. After hearing all of this, it makes me think, but do you believe there is a school to prison pipeline?
A school to prison pipeline. I do believe that there are cycles. I remember when I was in high school, you would have a mother of a teenage or a teenage mother, someone get pregnant, and then I'm actually now the age where I can recall their teenage daughter getting pregnant, and so I do believe there are cycles. And I do believe that if what we're currently doing is rewarding that cycle, and what we need to do is reward breaking the cycle, not continuing it. And so I think that I would argue that a lot of the bail reform that you're seeing nationally, especially in our urban areas, does create a cycle or a chain of poverty. And I think some of the reforms, especially when we're decriminalizing, so we're telling low-level criminals you're getting a green light. And so they start committing more crime. They get more brazen and they start committing larger crime. And once they do that, well, now you've actually made their situation much worse because you've given them a pass until they cross some line. And now they're looking at a much more severe penalty. And so we've actually created a worse situation for them by criminal justice reform.
To me, it seems weird. It almost, their stance, the ones that stand against cash bail, their stance almost has to assume this notion that the majority of Black people would be criminals, or not the majority of, but like a very large portion. Therefore, it disproportionately affects them. If you're not a racist, pardon my French here, if you're not a racist asshole, you don't think that 98% of the black population, 99%, just as it's basically about 2% of the population in general that commits crimes that send them to jail. If you're not a racist asshole, you're like, wait a second, the other 98% should not be punished for the crimes of the 2%. But it seems that these cash bail, what they're trying to do is basically in end punishes the law abiding simply for the fact that there's this soft bigotry of low expectations that goes into these laws.
I agree with that. And I think, our criminal justice system is becoming, this situation where we just have no expectation for you to become a better person. I mean, we hear that first-time offenders are losing their jobs because they're stuck in jail. I don't know about y'all, but where I'm seeing criminal justice reform, there's no first-time offenders in jail. Like right now, the Harris County Jail is full. And the DA there has testified before the Texas legislature. It's full of very dangerous people because of COVID. They haven't been resolving any cases for over a year. And those people need to be in jail. Well, that creates another problem. Our jail is full. We've got low-level offenders who are not appearing for court. So how do we hold them accountable without costing the county even more money? And so, our judges, if you want to give them a good intent, are trying to walk a very fine line. But so I would argue, if you put accountability in the system, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because you're going to have to hold people accountable and show them there's consequences for them not doing what they're supposed to do. But if you don't do that, it's just going to keep with chaos. And so it's going to get worse before it'll get better. But you put accountability back in the system, it will improve.
If you step back and look at things from a lens of, you don't want to fall into the conspiracy angle, but this looks so much like the movie Demolition Man, where it's like, let's set up. So if anybody hasn't seen it, it's pretty old. Kevin, it's probably, before you were born, but it's literally.
Doesn't mean I haven't seen Demolition Man. I have parents. My God.
Oh my God. That's even worse.
I have one, but still.
So ultimately what it's doing is we've taken every element that we can to strategically divide our society. We're now giving a chance for light level or low level criminals to just be out on the streets that therefore become higher level criminals. We've now flooded the jail system. We've now taken a pandemic to scare the crap out of people. It's literally a playbook of destroying the foundation, not just of America, but the world. If you want to look at it from this really negative, pessimistic lens, I mean, just based on what you're saying, it could be really scary for somebody to look at. We're allowing criminals, especially, California, $1,000 or less. You could do whatever you want. There's a lot of crime that murderers commit that aren't caught for the murder, but they are caught for the under $1,000 criminal activity. That's the reason why we keep some crime off the streets. This could be a tipping point where it could get really ugly. Or am I wrong about that, Ken?
No, I think you're right. And let's say, okay, well, let's don't be the total crazy conspiracy theorist, but I could argue a lot less craziness that 6 months before the last 3 or 4 national elections, we've had a push for some scandal, which was intended to bring out one segment of the electoral to make them mad, because so they would vote in higher numbers. And I would say that the result of some of our criminal justice reform, the push for decriminalization, is a result of all of those pushes 6 months before election. And now we're at the point, you're seeing it in our national Democratic leaders, that we're reaching a tipping point. And I would say Texas is probably showing the pendulum is starting to swing in the opposite direction, because their bail reform is the opposite of what some states have done. And you're seeing that even, the Democrats are saying, well, we're not the ones pushing defund the police. That's from the other side. So I think you're seeing, and I've seen a couple of articles where they're saying that they're expecting to be hurt pretty bad in the next year's election. So they're going to call that it was all because the real voters didn't vote. So you're seeing that people step away from these type of issues a year before the election. So I'm speculating that the internal polling on this stuff has got to the point where they cannot continue this. This will be the first national election next year where you will not see some big scandal to try to push and make a segment of the Democrat electorate mad, because I think it will turn off too many people. I think that's the point we are now.
We've got just a couple more questions before we ask about the Capitol protesters. And I want to notice that when the cat came on the screen, we jumped about 15 viewers. Super weird. Apparently we need more animals. All right. So the question I have before I get in, I want to go back to the state of Texas in a second, but with Kamala Harris, a lot of the Democrats, including Kamala, were big supporters, and I can't remember the name of it. One of our other hosts will remember, of the Innocence Project. Maybe I think that's what it was called.
No, you're talking about the bail system they set up for the BLM. Yeah, that's not the Innocence Project.
Okay, so what was that, and how is that even? How is that? Is not that? Is that? How is that something that the GOP is not slamming doors and showing facts on how negative that was? What was that? Explain that, Kevin, real quick.
Oh yeah, so during the whole BLM Antifa riots, and I'm sure Ken, you would know way more about it. I think you might have said Ken, but I heard Kev. So, the whole BLM. Okay, good. Yeah, no, there was just these bails, these funds set up to help fund the bail for these BLM protesters that had actually been arrested, to help get them out. Kamala Harris was, during the primaries this season, during the presidential campaign season, was advocating for these bail funds. Go donate, go support these BLM bail funds. Mind you, the people they're bailing out are people that were sealing cops into police stations in Portland and firebombing it, or were doing other incredibly violent stuff. And they have tried to pin her on it, and the leftist. I think the problem is that the corporate media intentionally will turn a blind eye to it because it was pretty insane. But that's the gist of it. Was she wanted to get BLM and Antifa protesters bail?
Well, and you saw a lot of people being arrested, and so the call went out. We need contributions because we need funds to bail out these protesters, these people who were patriots. And the problem is, probably 99% of them that had their criminal charges dismissed, and they were released without bail. So now we've got all these bail funds with millions of dollars, and they're a solution looking for a problem. And so, in the Texas bill, they're putting some restrictions on bail funds, but they're just transparency requirements. They have to disclose who they bonded out. They can't bond out dangerous people and people who are poor.
Suni, what is that right there? Is that the?
This is actually the fund.
That's the fund.
Yeah,
Yep.
the Freedom Fund.
Freedom Fund.
There it is.
And it expanded out to even more states to cover California, Portland, everything else, like everything that was going on. And I do want to ask you though, Ken. So even if we get a bail system put in where it says, even if it gets radical and it's like all people are required to be in jail until end of their trial, something obviously it's not going to happen. What's to stop these DAs and these governors in these states from just pardoning literally everyone who's ever even accused, to the point, or the governors would be doing that, or the DAs just not even pursuing any form of charges as we've been seeing them do?
To a certain extent, we've always had, prosecutorial discretion where, I've just got so many staff and I get to choose which cases we're going to pursue and which ones we're not. And you can even argue that the Bill Cosby conviction being overturned was the result of prosecutorial discretion, where the prosecutor made a deal not to prosecute him and did it in such a way so that he was required to testify in a civil case, which he ended up paying millions of dollars. And that was ultimately the reason why they threw out the conviction, because they held the new DA to that agreement. And so I think you've always had that to a history to a certain extent. But the problem we're getting now is, you go to Harris County, they don't prosecute low-level drug offenses anymore. But you go to Montgomery County right next door, you're going to have a criminal history. And that, to me, undermines the faith in the criminal justice system. I mean, we need to have a top-down review at the legislature on what are crimes and what that's of our dogs.
Dogs get used.
So she gets the welcome committee. But so we're going to have a top-down or we should have a top-down review of what are certain crimes. But we need to be the same across the state. We can't have these systems where one county it's a crime and another it's not, and that's what we're seeing, and that's undermining our criminal justice system.
I like that. That dog's got a good howl to it. My dog's the exact same way. Usually my dog will be up in my grill biting my ear. So, Sudi, do you have a question for Ken?
Yes. So, for the passing of this bill, which side is being more difficult? Like, who's being cooperative and who's being difficult to actually get
the one in
done?
Texas? Yeah. Good question.
There's two parts of our bill: the bill and then the constitutional amendment. I would say that the bill itself is probably a more conservative bill. So it's written from Texas whether it's been Democrat or Republican, has always been a conservative state. So the bill itself is more conservative, but the constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 vote. And so that means it has to have Democratic support to pass, and it passed the Senate, but the Speaker pro tem, who's a Democrat, right before they left town and went to D.C., promised that the constitutional amendment would fail. And so right now, the Democrats are the one that are keeping the bill from passing by leaving the state. And when they come back, if they prevent the constitutional amendment from passing, then that will then the state will not be able to deny people bail who are really the worst of the worst, because our Texas Constitution would still require them to be released.
What are the major differences between the constitutional amendment and the bill that would lead to so much pushback against one, but not necessarily the other?
Well, the constitutional amendment is very limited. It just adds, we're going to allow preventative detention for these classes of people. And it's second-time offenders, mostly for assault or sexual type crimes, or who have a criminal history or a conviction for that. You can deny them bail. Currently in Texas, it's either capital murder or third-time offenders. But it sets a really high standard, clear and convincing evidence before you can deny bail. So it's very difficult to deny bail, even under this part of the bill. The rest of the bill, there's many different parts, but the rest of the bill is the criminal justice review of the criminal histories, training for the judges. And probably my favorite part of the bill is, if you're a judge, you have to sign off on a piece of paper that you reviewed all these documents, including criminal history, before you set the bail. And I promise you, when someone is released on a bond and then they kill somebody, that you're going to see that document on the evening news. They were released because it's a public document. They were released from jail by Judge Ken Good, and that's not going to be pretty.
It's not Ken Good.
Yeah. It's funny that we're talking about they're denied bail because of murder, yet we've got the January 6th protesters, and Casey's got a question about that. Go ahead, Case.
Yeah, January 6th is an interesting day. That causes a whole bunch of questions for a lot of people. But what is what is the position that with the January 6th protesters? Like we know some that are in there right now. It, in my opinion, has not been a right to a fair and speedy trial. But they're being held still currently with a nonviolent crime, and they are still sitting in prison right now.
Jail.
This is a very good example of the federal system for setting bail, and that requires either you're released on the equivalent of a PR bond or just a signature bond, or you're held. And so, like in the federal system, 70% of the people are just held. And the reason why we don't use that in other states is because we don't have the infrastructure to hold 70% of the people who are arrested. And so that can't work. We can't use the federal system throughout the rest of the country for those reasons alone. And so it's not a good system for us to look for as an example. We have to find other ways to process people through the jail, and we can't just detain everybody.
So go ahead, Casey.
I just have a follow-up to that. Do you envision that might be a goal? Because you do see the Capitol Police setting up offices in Florida and California. And so I'm wondering, is that something that's trying to be spread to where that's possible?
I don't think so, and let me tell you why. Because the Washington D.C. is very one-party centric, and as a result, you had these people for the January 6th, whatever it was, arrested across the country, and they were taking their local magistrates, and a lot of them had bail set. And then that order was sent to D.C., and then you had a judge, I believe, in D.C. set aside that and ordered them to be taken into custody if they were allowed to be released and brought to D.C. So I think I believe you're seeing the impact of one side of the political process having a big influence. I think that's not true. We don't have another state, especially Florida, where the state is 90-something% one party. So I think it'd be very difficult for that to spread somewhere else, and I'm thankful for that as well.
So My thing is, I believe that no one is ever 100% right about anything, and neither is anybody 100% wrong anything. When you look at the Republican and Democrat approach to this, is there anything that you look at on the Democratic side where you're like, maybe their solution to this is a little extreme, but they're making a good point that I wish my conservative my conservative friends would take a deeper look at? Maybe something, it doesn't have to be their solution, but maybe they're making a good point about something that the conservatives aren't really thinking about. Is there anything that comes to mind for that?
No, and I'll tell you, and I'll tell you why. And the reason why is because we can't have an honest debate. Look at the election integrity bill in Texas. The Wall Street Journal or several of the national publications wrote opinion pieces saying bill is a reasonable bill, but the Democrats are really kind of stuck in a hole. They cannot say it's a reasonable bill that they want to push a little bit more to the left because the president of the United States has come out saying it's Armageddon if this bill passes. So they're stuck being following the national agenda. The same thing happens on bail reform. Our friends on the other side are stuck on one side and they're being directed by the national party when that doesn't work in Texas because Texas is a conservative state. The reason why we haven't had a Democrat governor in several years is because to raise money, they have to take the positions of the national party, and that doesn't work in Texas. So they raise money, but they can't get elected because Texas is a conservative state, even when it was a Democrat state.
Yeah. So do you think there's anything legally? I mean, if we're looking specifically, because again, our audience is always interested in Cash and what's going on with the group of protesters. A lot of us know, and we repeat it, Cash has a previous offense. He'd be in there either way, just not in D.C. But the 30 people he's with have misdemeanors that, for the most 25 of the 30, have misdemeanors of breaking and entering and trespassing. And they're being held since February or March, in some cases being told they have to take certain plea deals, and some of them can't even take a plea deal to get out. How is that not a massive flaw in our system where you're having people on minor offenses that have zero criminal history being held for what it sounds like the first court dates are going to be in February of next year? So a full calendar year for people that their offenses don't even equal a year.
This is going to continue to be a problem as long as the party in power supports and allows this to take place. Because really what you would argue is this is just taking advantage of your political opponents. So the party in power is taking and abusing the followers of the other side. And so I would argue these 30 people are there as pawns. They're as pawns to the establishment on the right. And as long as as the national party of the Democrat Party will allow that, it's going to continue. And I would say they're better than allowing it. They're cheerleaders for it. Look at what we had today with their little truth commission, which is anything but. If you listen to their speeches, it's just going to continue on. And I would even argue that the more crazy they get on that is it tells you how more worried they are about Trump. The more they say he's crazy, the more they say they're crazy, the more worried they are about Trump.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Do you guys have any more questions about bail reform? We're going to keep Ken around if he's good with it for just a little bit more, because him and I were talking a little bit about Simone Biles before, and I would love him to stick around for the conversation. Do you guys have any other bail reform questions?
No, I actually don't.
I got only one. If you could snap your fingers and change one thing about our current bail system, what would it be?
I think it's what we're doing in Texas. It's review criminal histories. I mean,
fair enough.
Bail is, the bail system's been around for over 200 years. We do one thing great. We get people to court. If our courts no longer care about whether people come to court, then you don't need us. But if you care about people coming to court, you need the private bail system. Plain and simple. We do one thing. We do a great job.
Awesome. Yeah. I would agree with you too. So.
I like it. All right, let's get really quick into Simone Biles. I think we'll do Simone Biles. We'll talk January 6th commission after that, and then I got to play the Biden misinformation to wrap up the show. Tomorrow on Conservengers, I didn't talk about this, by the way. We do have, of course, a Conservengers tomorrow night. We got Matt Locke joining us from the Matt Locke Show. So episode 22 will be tomorrow, and we are going to talk little bit about Suni's show earlier today about the 25th Amendment quickly coming in hot, I believe, and the fact that apparently Joe Biden got his butt wiped, which was super weird soundbite today. That was the weirdest thing I've ever heard, along with some of the other things he said in the last week about what are we drinking the blood of children? Like, why would that be? Anyways, moving on. Let's go to Simone Biles. This started a little bit of a brouhaha on my page, but a good conversation. So anybody that needs the back story to a bit, Simone Biles is the best gymnast probably in history, which would deem somebody to be the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Simone Biles, however, no, Suni. No, you're not. You're not a gymnast. You're conservative GOAT. Now I get it. Okay. So with that said, she had a bad landing in the vault and then withdrew from the team competition. And it was first stated that it was a medical condition. Then it was changed to a mental health issue. And then her comment afterwards was that she was under a ton of strain. There's also mental strain. There's also rumors saying that there's publications saying whatever she was doing was not being scored correctly. It was being scored on a curve because she's so much better than everybody else, which again, I think is a little bit objective, but they have outlawed some of her best moves, which is a little bit rough. Regardless, she said it was a mental health decision that she pulled out. I'm still saying that she is one of the greatest of all time, physically probably the most gifted, definitely the most talented, but being the GOAT, the greatest of all time, means that you have the strongest mindset. You are a killer when it comes to the championship match. And I said, prove me wrong. And there was a whole lot of debate. So does anybody want to go first on if you think that Simone Biles is still the GOAT? And the reason I brought this up, by the way, is I saw it in an article. I'm not just going to randomly talk about it. She's an American athlete. I like Simone Biles. I think she's great. But they said she proved herself to still be the GOAT because she pulled out. I'm like, no, that's not how I see things. But Suni, what do you got?
Sport the GOAT doesn't compete in.
Yeah.
Right.
Suni, go ahead.
Let's just be honest, all right? When you're talking about the GOAT, you're talking about competitors that compete through rain, sleet, snow. It doesn't matter. Michael Jordan played through the flu. You didn't ever hear him say, I need a mental day. No.
Hangover.
Hangover, flu.
No, it was food. It was food poisoning. Remember, it was food poisoning.
It was a hangover. Obviously, he thinks it's the pizza, but it was the alcohol too.
I don't know. People aren't gonna like my take on it, but this is what happens when you let a woman be a woman. Oh, I'm not getting scored right. Oh, this is a little hard. Oh, this is hard. Oh, I need a mental break. Like, bro. How are you gonna be called the GOAT, but you need a mental break? Then you should have never competed from jump because, the Olympics are weird. It just is. Everything the temperature in our country is weird. Of course, the Olympics are gonna be weird. They politicize it a bit, but I'm not giving her any slack, bro. I'm not giving her any slack. You're the GOAT, and you have an emoji in everybody's freaking phone, and you needed a mental day.
Yeah, and that's like the Naomi Osaka thing, all these different things. And they're like, to me, it's performing at the highest level at the one point. And you know what? If you have to break down, you wait until the championship or the Olympics are over.
It's from a broader push to demasculate men. It comes from it's let's put it this way, right? It used to be women that competed in athletics had to reach the level of men. So what would end up happening? You had women that would push through even more, especially during competitive events, than men ever could, because they're like, no, I have to prove myself. What we have created and instead is a culture that is overly embracive of mental problems, that calls for more men to be so open about their mental state that everyone gets oh my God, everything needs to be taken care of. Like, you're a man, you need to be so proud about your emotions. Look, that is what your family's for. That is why you have a wife, because you need to be strong. We need strong foundation points. And this comes to now, when you look at it, women used to try to show so little emotion like men do. Now you want men to show as much. I guarantee you, if a male athlete does this now, they are going to be paraded around everything.
Can I just make one comment? Just because I seen something in the comments. When are we gonna stop with the like emotional antics to like draw sympathy? I've been sexually assaulted. All right.
I'm right there with you.
I put my business out on Facebook for everybody to know. People saw me have multiple breakdowns. It is what it is, bro. We experience it, we get past it. But making that an excuse for why she couldn't compete, that's a crock of shit. I'm sorry.
Before we go to Casey, and here's my point on, and I want to make a very specific point because that I am not taking anything away from her as a human being. I'm not taking anything away from her talent, being probably the most talented, gifted person on the planet, and how horrific sexual abuse is to anybody. I cannot take that away, but we are talking specifically about one terminology called the greatest of all time, which when you're the greatest of all time at your sport, it's got nothing to do with your upbringing and past. It's got to do with how you perform on the field of battle.
Michael Jordan's father was murdered, and he won championships. He won 3 straight championships. I have been sexually assaulted, both in childhood and adulthood. And Jesus freaking Christ, I'm sick and tired of that being used as this. It is the push for the victim culture. Everybody should be a victim. We should all validate everybody's victimhood at all times. It's like, no, this is getting ridiculous. Like, I don't mind talking about being sexually assaulted because I'm not sitting here crying about it in front of you guys and getting letting the emotional side of it through, because that is something private. That is something that is to be experienced with you and those that you love and trust. Not to say you can't do that publicly. But for Simone Biles to bail on her team, at the highest level, you can't be the GOAT if that's what you do. The GOAT fucking wins. That's all the GOAT does. The GOAT wins. The greatest.
Or they die on their shield. If she was, if it's okay, I'm gonna have Ken go next because I know he was watching. No, you're good. He was watching last night. The thing is this: if she was being scored incorrectly, I know the back. Everybody's like, do your research. I know what was going on. They said that she was being scored differently, etc. The one thing that the greatest of all time and that the hero does is they go out on their shield. They find a way to go all the way until there is nothing left. Now, there were things said in the comments that I was like, I can see some differences. But Ken, you were actually watching. I think you said you were watching when she pulled out during the vault. What are your thoughts on this heated exchange as a group where we all seem to agree?
Well, I feel like this is the Michael Jordan fan club here because I kind of agree. But, I grew up in the Michael Jordan era. I don't remember Michael Jordan saying, I'm the greatest, I'm the GOAT, I'm the GOAT, I'm the GOAT. And so what I grew up with, other people talked about you being the greatest, not yourself. Now, maybe Muhammad Ali is the exception, but that's the mindset I grew up with. But I would also argue that from the last couple of weeks in the tryouts, you could see the seeds of this. You could see the mistakes being made team-wide and by Simone. And maybe Simone's just trying to do too much. She's got her own gym. She's got all these new skills. She's trying to push herself. And you could even see commentators the night before saying, oh, Simone is so much better. She's going to give us a cushion to make for all this. So when we got there, she's like, she's got to be extra good so that we'll have that cushion for our just average people. And I can see why that would get to her. But I do think, you can't be disappointed. You can't be anything but disappointed in her, because when her team needed her the most, for whatever reason, she wasn't there for them. And it wasn't because of a physical injury. And I'm not trying to downgrade what she went through, but when her team needed her the most, she wasn't there.
Yeah. We're going to really quick say goodbye to Kevin. He's got to roll out as well. Yeah. And Ken, stick around for just a little bit longer if you can. Kevin, take it easy. Give a shout out to what you got going on and where you're going or whatever you got.
Thank you so much. Check us out.
Well, we're out of time. He had to run.
Damn it, I didn't get it up in time. We're over here. Check us out over at Liberty Revolt Media. It's always a blast being here. And I just want to say both of these issues, they come back to accountability. Accountability is one of the biggest things missing from our culture today. Everything seems to be a way to escape accountability. And as soon as we as a people decide I am comfortable being held accountable for my actions, we will see a much better improvement. But until we're comfortable with that, it's going to remain shit. Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. Have a good rest of your night.
you later, Kevin. Take it easy, brother.
Right.
All right, so I want to. Sorry, who was that? I missed.
That was me. I just said well said.
Oh, sorry, my bad. All right, so I want to go more because I started thinking, what is the GOAT has to do with championships, and that was another issue with in the beginning of LeBron James' career, he never hit a game-winning shot. Like it took him years to get there, and people were already calling him the GOAT, and I was like, I can't be a part of that conversation. I used to like LeBron James, but when you're talking about performing, and people used a couple references, they said Michael Jordan quit when his father died. He did not quit during the championship series. He quit after the season, then went and played baseball, and you could say that's for his father or gambling. There's a whole bunch going on. But fact is, there's no chance in hell he was going to leave during the middle of a championship series. And then two, people say, well, mentally she wasn't there, so she could have risked major injury. I'm not saying it's not a valid excuse to pull yourself out, but let's look at Carrie Strug, who landed during the 1996 Olympics, landed with one fucking leg. Like she had every reason to pull herself out, and she said, I was going to do it for my team. Now that is something that a GOAT does, even though the talent-wise, she has, to me, if you want me to say GOAT, the GOAT of the Olympics, although Simone Biles has more medals than any other American female gymnast, I believe. I'm like 99.9% sure. And she's one of the greatest of all time. I get it. One of the greatest. The greatest moment, the GOAT moment, the greatest of all time moment goes to Carrie Strug sticking that in 1996 because she did something that was physically impossible because she was so strong in mind, had such a competitive spirit. She had the Kobe Bryant Mamba mentality, Michael Jordan mentality, Muhammad Ali saying, I will not lose mentality. And I think that that's just lacking in the fact that we're playing into the fact that she still deserves to be considered the best in the world is just, it sounds about right for America in 2021 to allow that kind of behavior to be considered the best of the best.
Facts. I'm going to use a term a little bit different, and yes, facts. I 100% agree. Take it the same direction, but it comes back to leadership. When you are the GOAT or you're the best on your team, you lead your team. And when you quit on your team, what does that say? That's why this is such a big conversation. Like you would not see Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. You wouldn't see some of the older guys that are like Mutombo. You wouldn't have some of them just walk out on their team and be like, "Sorry, I can't do it." They don't. They are leaders, and leadership is important, and we are losing that in our country, and we are losing that in developing that in our kids. So when they actually come up and they actually get into these positions, they have true leadership. We don't have that anymore. Like we still struggle with that at my current work. Like it's not there. Yeah. And so you need to actually have a leadership mentality. And when you are the GOAT, you are the number one to where you lead the team and you set the example of we need to do better. Go back and watch The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. He held his team accountable. Even his first year coming into the NBA, he was like, no, I don't do that. I don't do that. I don't party late at night and that. We don't do that.
He did have... Go ahead. Finish up. Sorry.
Well, he just didn't like it. Like, yeah, he might have had a couple stints, but it was not the MO. You don't have the Golden State Warriors crapping on the Utah Jazz because they don't have a nightlife. No, you play basketball. Why are you worried about a nightlife?
Yeah.
And so that is where leadership comes in, and that is what would be done. And Simone had the opportunity, and she did not do it. That is where I'm very disappointed.
And there's some. Go ahead, Ken.
We can't have an educational, a hard educational or intelligent debate on issues anymore. I mean, we're now teaching our young that you argue, and if somebody disagrees with you, you just say you're stupid or you're an idiot because you don't agree with me. And so we're not teaching even our kids anymore on how to defend their positions, because even in our politicians, they can't defend their positions anymore. So they just say you're an idiot or you're a crook, you're a right-wing fanatic. And so we're losing a generation on just being able to debate issues. Like this is just a really good example. I mean, we ought to have some fundamental things that we all agree on as a country. Like we ought to be able to all agree she let her team down. at the very least. She let her team down. We should all agree with that. Now, are we critical because of? I mean, we can disagree about whether we're critical because we're not in her head. What's going on? But there should be some. I mean, even if we think she's a goat, which I, probably 5 years ago I didn't know what was. I just thought it was an animal. But we're now at the point where we can't even agree on some certain things. Like we can't even agree from a certain mindset that she let her team down. And we ought to be, as a society, as United States of America, we ought to be able to at least agree on something as silly as that in the debate. But if you're defending her, you can't even agree with that.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Ken, is there's some people saying that because she was being scored difficultly and saying that she didn't have it, that she actually helped her team by withdrawing from the competition. And to me, I get where that mindset can come from, but to me, that shows a mentally weakened society where we think that that's even an option. If you are the greatest, you go, no matter what is going on. And to answer Kelly's question, did she call herself the GOAT? No, but what she said in the interview was, the pressure of being the best got to me and broke me down. The pressure of being considered the best.
She didn't say in that interview, but she did call herself the GOAT. She had emblems, she had shoes, or she had things.
That's right.
On it. So she did refer to herself as.
I forgot about that. I forgot all about that. That's right. But yeah, I mean, she talked about the fact the pressure of being held at a higher standard as the greatest in the world is what broke her. And is she physically and skillfully superior to all other gymnasts? Yes, 100%. And if you are physically and skillfully superior to all other gymnasts and you don't win, not because you didn't try, but because you quit, then you are no longer the greatest of all time. And I can't think of another female gymnast that's better than her. But I just think it waters down the greatness of all the other great. I think it's just hard. I can see the pressure, and Ken and I talked about it before the show, that this year is different. They're going through a lot of different things. The American team is facing a lot of political pressure. There's also everybody separated. There's no fans. There's a lot to be said about why this is so much harder than other years. But when it comes down to being the best in the world at something and being considered the best of all time, that shit doesn't matter.
And as of this morning, we can list 4 girls from Russia who have the gold medal, who scored higher than someone who many people call the greatest of all time.
There you go.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Like LeBron James being carried off the court because of a sore ankle. Okay.
Man, LeBron James is a baby. Nobody likes him.
Oh,
nobody likes LeBron. Like,
what? Captain accountability. All right, Ken, it was so great to have you on. We're going to whip through the rest of the show. We're going to make it quick because we're already at our hour. But Ken, is there anything that you're got going on that you promote right now? Is there anything that you want to talk about or final words? All the above. The floor is yours. And by the way, I think as the reform bills are coming into action, please have your team email me again. Let's have you come back up for a show. But go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, I just want to say that I am on the Sunni fan club. So I am signing up for her, and I'm following her on all of her social media because my goal in life is to be Sunni.
It's my mom's line.
Greatest of all time in my book. It's been a great time. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope to be able to do something with you again in the future.
Sounds great, Ken. Take it easy, brother. Thanks for being on the show. Appreciate you.
Bye.
Later, brother.